Shadows of the Enslaved. Prologue. In a world that once thrived under the glow of a serene moon, a cataclysmic event shattered the very fabric of reality. The peaceful existence of humanity was torn apart when the moon, their celestial guardian, fractured into 1,000 burning shards. From its broken core emerged an unrelenting darkness, casting shadows of despair and chaos across the earth. Amidst the ruins of civilization, a small group of survivors banded together, driven by an unwavering hope and the will to endure. Kai, a determined 16-year-old boy, stood as the unlikely protector of his grandparents, Helen and Robert. Their once tranquil neighborhood, now a wasteland, was filled with the echoes of screams and the ominous glow of fires burning in the distance. As they navigated the perilous streets, they encountered others who shared their plight. Sarah, a resourceful leader with fierce determination. Dr. Martinez, a compassionate yet focused healer. Alex, a guarded loner with a mysterious past. Lily, a young mechanic with a gift for fixing the unfixable. And Tom, a former soldier whose vigilance and strength offered a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. Together, they faced not only the physical devastation, but also the unraveling of humanity itself. The fractured moon hung ominously in the sky, its red glow a constant reminder of the unknown horrors yet to come. From its cracks, dark shadows emerged, threatening to consume what little hope remained. Shadows of the Enslaved is a tale of survival, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. As they fight to protect one another and uncover the truth behind the catastrophe, their journey reveals the depths of both human cruelty and kindness. In this new world, where the lines between friend and foe blur, they must confront their darkest fears and rise above the shadows that seek to enslave them. Welcome to their story, a story of light amidst darkness, of hope amidst despair, and of the unbreakable bonds that can withstand even the most harrowing of trials. Chapter 1. The Last Normal Day. Kai sat on the porch of his grandparents' house, the warm summer breeze carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the neatly kept lawns and flower beds of the neighborhood. The houses, with their charming facades and inviting front yards, formed a close-knit community where everyone knew each other. It was a scene of pure joy, a moment of peace in a world that had yet to show its true darkness. Laughter echoed from inside the house, where his grandparents were preparing dinner. Kai's grandmother hummed a cheerful tune as she stirred a pot of her famous stew, the aroma filling the air. His grandfather was setting the table, carefully placing each dish with a precision that spoke of years of practice. The clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversation filled the room, blending with the sounds of crickets and the distant barking of a dog. As Kai stepped inside, he was greeted with warm smiles and the familiar comfort of home. The family gathered around the dinner table, sharing stories and dreams of the future. Kai's grandparents talked about their plans for the garden, while Kai recounted his latest adventures with friends. It was a moment of connection, where love and laughter flowed freely. Kai felt a deep sense of contentment, surrounded by love and the promise of tomorrow. They ate heartily, the comfort of home-cooked food adding to the evening's warmth. After dinner, they settled in the living room, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. His grandmother knitted a new scarf, while his grandfather read aloud from an old book, his voice soothing and steady. Kai listened, his eyes growing heavy with the peacefulness of the moment. "Grandpa, do you think things will always be this good?" Kai asked, a hint of worry in his voice. His grandfather looked up from his book, his eyes softening as he met Kai's gaze. "We can only hope, Kai. But no matter what happens, we'll face it together. That's what family is for." Kai nodded, feeling a surge of affection for his grandparents. He couldn't imagine life without them. The night of terror. But as the night fell, an unsettling stillness descended. The usual chorus of crickets and owls was replaced by an eerie silence. Kai, trying to fall asleep, was suddenly jolted by a strange reddish light filtering through his window. It wasn't the gentle glow of the moon. This light felt unnatural, giving him chills. He got up and peered through the window, seeing some neighbors already outside, their faces illuminated by the ominous light. Kai quickly put on some clothes and rushed outside. The reddish light bathed everything in an eerie glow, and an uneasy tension hung in the air. His heart skipped a beat as he looked up at the sky. The moon, once a beacon of tranquility, had turned a sinister shade of red. It seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, growing larger and larger as if descending upon the earth. The sky, too, began to change, shifting from the deep blue of night to a terrifying crimson. The stars blinked out one by one, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Kai's neighbors stood outside their homes, their faces filled with awe and confusion. "What's happening?" someone murmured. "Is it an eclipse?" another asked, fear creeping into their voice. Suddenly the moon fractured, shards breaking away and burning up before reaching the ground, turning the sky into a backdrop of red with fiery fragments raining down. Black, grotesque figures started emerging from the cracks in the moon, their forms twisting and writhing. They were still far away, but the atmosphere changed, thickening with a sense of evil and sinister intent, amplified by the worst of humankind. This was just the start. Kai felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew something was coming. He ran inside to inform his grandparents, his voice trembling with urgency. "Something's wrong. We need to hide," he said. His grandparents, sensing the fear in his voice, followed him without question. Kai climbed to the roof to see where the screams were coming from. From the distance, he saw a group of people breaking into houses one by one, moving methodically through the neighborhood. He still had some time to run. As he descended from the roof, the sense of urgency intensified. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced to figure out what to do. He was running out of time. He began destroying everything inside the house, overturning furniture, breaking paintings, and creating a scene of chaos. "We have to make it look like this place has already been attacked," he explained, his voice trembling with urgency. His grandparents helped, their movements frantic. Desperate measures. The front door burst open, and Kai barely had time to hide before the group entered the house. He peeked through a crack in the wall, his body trembling with fear. The invaders moved through the house, their guttural voices filling the air as they searched for anything of value. "Looks like someone already beat us to it," one of them growled, kicking a broken chair out of the way. "Check the bedrooms," another commanded. "There might still be something worth taking." Kai held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear his grandparents' ragged breathing beside him as they huddled together in their hiding spot. The sound of footsteps echoed through the house, each one a dagger of fear. "Nothing here but smashed furniture and broken dishes," a third voice called from the kitchen. "Keep looking," the leader snarled. "There has to be something." Kai's mind raced. If they found them, it would be over. He tightened his grip on the broken table leg he had picked up as a makeshift weapon, ready to defend his family if it came to that. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The invaders continued their search, muttering curses and throwing debris aside. Kai's muscles ached from the tension, his eyes never leaving the small crack through which he watched. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the leader growled in frustration. "This place is a bust. Let's move on." Kai watched as the intruders filed out of the house, their footsteps fading into the night. He waited, heart pounding, until he was sure they were gone. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The escape. Kai emerged from his hiding spot, his body trembling. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice a whisper. His grandparents nodded, their faces pale but resolute. They gathered what few belongings they could, moving as silently as possible. The night was a nightmare come to life, with chaos spreading as people ran in every direction, desperately seeking safety. Kai felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew he had to stay strong for his grandparents. They were counting on him, and he was their only chance. They went inside to get the keys to the car in the garage and grabbed whatever food they could. As they emerged from the house, they saw that the neighborhood was in ruins. There was nothing left but shattered homes and broken lives. Kai glanced up at the sky once more. The black figures he had seen earlier were larger now, their presence looming over the city. The air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. It was as if the very atmosphere had turned malevolent, filled with an evil that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was not just a fleeting moment of terror. It was the beginning of something far worse. The figures continued to grow, their forms becoming more defined and terrifying. They seemed to feed off the chaos below, growing stronger with each passing second. Kai's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to his grandparents. "We need to go. Now," he said, his voice firm despite the fear that gripped him. They hurried to the car, their steps quick and silent. The screams of their neighbors echoed in the distance, a haunting reminder of the fate they were desperately trying to escape. As they drove away from the neighborhood, Kai couldn't shake the feeling that they were running from more than just the destruction of their home. They were fleeing from an unimaginable horror that was only just beginning to unfold. Kai looked back one last time. The figures were now fully formed, towering over the city like dark sentinels. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, and their presence seemed to cast a shadow over everything. He knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of their nightmare. The car sped down the deserted streets, leaving behind the remnants of their once peaceful lives. Kai's mind raced with questions and fears, but one thing was clear. They had to survive, no matter what. As the city disappeared in the rearview mirror, the full weight of their situation settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his resolve hardening. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to protect his family. The fight for survival had just begun. Chapter 2. The Aftermath and Survival. Immediate aftermath. The car finally sputtered to a halt, the gas tank empty. Kai looked around, heart sinking as he realized they would have to continue on foot. They grabbed what supplies they could carry and set off, staying close to the shadows. The city around them was engulfed in darkness and despair, fires burning in the distance and screams echoing through the night. Helen clutched Kai's arm, her face pale with fear. Robert, his expression grim, took the lead, scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. They moved cautiously through the rubble-strewn streets, their senses on high alert. "We need to find a safe place to hide," Robert whispered, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. As they crept through the city, the sounds of shouting and screaming grew louder. Kai motioned for them to duck into a nearby store that had been destroyed by falling pieces of the moon. The once bustling shop was now a ruin, with shattered windows and shelves overturned. They huddled behind a counter, trying to stay as silent as possible. Just as they began to catch their breath, they heard muffled voices coming from beneath the rubble. Kai exchanged a worried glance with his grandparents. Carefully, they moved towards the sound, shifting debris to reveal a small group of people trapped underneath. "Help us!" a woman's voice pleaded weakly from beneath a pile of bricks. "Stay quiet," Robert hissed, keeping his voice low. "We don't know if it's safe yet." They waited silently until the sounds of the crazed group of marauders faded into the distance. Once they were sure the danger had passed, Kai, Helen, and Robert began to help the trapped survivors emerge from the rubble. The woman's face emerged first, dirty and streaked with tears. She was followed by a few others, all looking disoriented and terrified. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm Sarah." "Kai," he replied, offering a reassuring smile despite the chaos around them. "These are my grandparents, Helen and Robert." As they helped the others out of the debris, they introduced themselves. Dr. Martinez, a medical professional, immediately began checking for injuries. Alex, a mysterious loner, kept to the shadows, his eyes darting around nervously. Lily, a young woman with a knack for mechanics, tried to fix a broken flashlight she had found. Tom, a former soldier, surveyed their surroundings, his survival instincts kicking in. "We need to stick together if we're going to make it through this," Sarah said, her voice firm but kind. "Let's share what we have and help each other." Kai nodded in agreement. "We can't stay here. It's too exposed." "Agreed," Tom said. "But first, let's make sure everyone is okay and gather what we can from here." They moved carefully through the ruins of the store, gathering any useful supplies. As they worked, they began to learn more about each other, sharing stories and building bonds. "So, you really think those pieces of the moon caused all this?" Alex asked, his voice low as they sifted through the debris. "It's the only explanation that makes sense," Kai replied. "I've never seen anything like this before." Lily, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We need to find shelter soon. It's getting colder, and we can't stay exposed like this." After gathering enough supplies, they set out to find a more secure location. The streets were eerily quiet, the earlier chaos replaced by an unsettling silence. They eventually found an abandoned warehouse that appeared to be sturdy enough to provide shelter. "This should do for now," Robert said, inspecting the structure. "Let's get inside and barricade the doors." They worked quickly, using anything they could find to fortify their new shelter. Once inside, they settled down, trying to make the best of their dire situation. They huddled together, trying to stay warm and find some semblance of comfort. Kai gathered some wood and started a small fire for warmth, but Tom quickly put it out. "We can't risk attracting attention," he said, his voice firm. "That group from before could still be out there." The realization of their vulnerability settled over them like a heavy blanket. The night was cold and long, filled with the distant sounds of chaos and the weight of their collective fears. "Do you think we'll ever be safe again?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to believe we will," Sarah replied, her tone resolute. "We have to keep fighting." As they lay in the darkness, the flickering embers of the extinguished fire casting shadows on the walls, they clung to the hope that they would survive the night and whatever horrors the next day might bring. The fight for survival had only just begun. Scavenging for supplies. The first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the warehouse walls. The chaos of the night seemed to have calmed with the arrival of daylight, offering a brief moment of reprieve. The group stirred, stretching sore muscles and assessing their situation. "We need food and medical supplies," Dr. Martinez said, his voice breaking the silence. "We can't stay here without them." Sarah nodded. "Tom, Alex, Lily, Kai, and I will go out. The rest of you stay here and secure the place. We need to be back before dark." They gathered what little equipment they had and set out, sticking to the shadows and moving cautiously through the desolate streets. The city was eerily quiet, the previous night's chaos leaving an unsettling calm. "Stay close and keep your eyes open," Tom advised, his military training evident in his careful movements. The group reached a nearby grocery store. The windows were shattered, and the interior was a mess of overturned shelves and scattered goods. They quickly went to work, gathering as much food and water as they could find. "We need to hurry," Sarah urged. "We don't know how long it'll stay quiet out here." Just as they were finishing up, a noise from the back of the store caught their attention. They froze, listening intently. "It's probably just a rat," Alex whispered, but his hand hovered near his knife. "We can't take any chances," Tom said, motioning for them to follow him as he investigated. To their relief, it was just a raccoon rummaging through the remains. They breathed a collective sigh of relief and finished their task. Their next stop was a pharmacy a few blocks away. The journey was tense, but they managed to reach it without incident. Inside, they found a treasure trove of medical supplies. Dr. Martinez would be pleased. "Did you see those people last night?" Lily asked, her voice shaking as she stuffed supplies into her bag. "What were they doing?" "Terrible things," Sarah replied, her face grim. "We need to be more careful from now on." With their bags full, they began the cautious trek back to the warehouse. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows that seemed to move with them. Kai couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Back at the warehouse, the rest of the group had made significant progress in fortifying their shelter. They reinforced the doors and windows, creating a more secure environment. "We did well today," Sarah said, as they gathered around to share a meal. "But we can't let our guard down. We'll need to go out again tomorrow and find more supplies. This is just the beginning." As the day turned to evening, the group prepared for another long night. They knew that nightfall brought danger, and they needed to be vigilant. Night watch. As night fell, the group decided to take turns guarding from the roof. Kai and Tom were the first to take watch. They climbed to the roof, the cool night air chilling them as they settled in, peering into the darkness below. "Keep your eyes open," Tom instructed. "Night is when things get really dangerous." Kai nodded, gripping his makeshift weapon tightly. The sounds of the night were different now, more sinister. Screams and shouts echoed in the distance, and the silhouettes of people doing unspeakable things flickered in the dim light. "What drives people to do this?" Kai whispered, his voice trembling. "Fear. Desperation," Tom replied quietly. "When everything falls apart, some people lose their humanity." Kai's eyes were drawn to the sky. The pieces of the moon still floated around, casting an eerie glow. The black mass that had covered the moon the previous night was no longer visible. "Where do you think that thing went?" he asked, pointing to the sky. "I don't know," Tom said, "but we need to be ready for anything." The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity as they watched the chaos unfold below. They saw people looting, fighting, and worse. The sight was both terrifying and disheartening. "We're going to make it through this, right?" Kai asked, needing reassurance. "We have to," Tom replied. "For our own sanity, we have to believe we will." Eventually, their shift ended, and they were replaced by Sarah and Alex. Kai descended from the roof, his body exhausted but his mind racing. He lay down next to his grandparents, Helen gently stroking his hair. "Get some rest," she whispered. "We'll need our strength for tomorrow." Kai closed his eyes, but sleep was elusive. The images of the night haunted him, and the uncertainty of their future loomed large. Yet despite the fear, a small spark of hope remained. They had each other, and for now, that was enough. The fight for survival had only just begun, searching for a permanent shelter. The next morning, the group awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The daylight brought with it a feeling of cautious optimism. They knew they had to find a more permanent and secure base if they were to survive in the long term. "We need to find a better location," Robert said, surveying the makeshift fortifications they had put in place. "Something more defensible with access to resources." Tom nodded in agreement. "We need to be strategic about this. Let's scout several locations and weigh our options." The group set out once again, this time with a clearer goal in mind. Tom led the way, his military training guiding their movements. They moved cautiously, staying alert for any signs of danger. As they explored the city, they came across various potential shelters, a partially collapsed apartment building, an old library, and a church. Each had its pros and cons, but none seemed quite right. "We need something that offers better protection," Tom said, frustration evident in his voice. After hours of searching, they stumbled upon an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. The building was sturdy, with thick walls and a large open interior that could be easily fortified. "This looks promising," Tom said, inspecting the structure. "We can make this work." "Are you sure about this?" Alex asked, doubt creeping into his voice. "It seems too open." Tom nodded, his expression resolute. "It's open, but we can fortify it. The thick walls and multiple entry points make it defensible. Plus, there's enough space for all of us and our supplies." Kai, drawing from his knowledge of video games and movies, chimed in. "In survival scenarios, a place like this is ideal. We can set up different zones for living, storage, and defense. We can create barriers and traps to protect ourselves." Sarah looked around, weighing their options. "All right, let's give it a try. We don't have many other choices." They spent the rest of the day cleaning and securing the factory. They set up sleeping areas, a makeshift kitchen, and storage for their supplies. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "We'll need to establish roles and routines," Sarah said, gathering everyone together. "Tom, you take charge of security. Dr. Martinez, you're in charge of medical supplies and care. Alex and Lily, you handle repairs and maintenance. Kai and I will focus on gathering supplies and scouting." The group nodded in agreement. They had a plan, and for the first time since the catastrophe, they felt a glimmer of hope. Establishing a base. As night fell, they gathered around a small, carefully concealed fire. The warmth and light were a welcome comfort after the long day. They shared stories, their laughter a brief respite from the harsh reality of their situation. Helen spoke first, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I know this is hard for all of us, but we've made it this far. We have to stay strong for each other." Dr. Martinez nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We need to take care of our health, both physical and mental. If anyone feels overwhelmed, please speak up. We're in this together." Alex, usually reserved, added, "I never thought I'd rely on strangers, but here we are. Let's make this work." Lily smiled, her eyes twinkling despite the fear. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll come out of this stronger." Tom, ever the leader, gave a small nod. "We will, but we need to stay vigilant. Every day is a new challenge." "Do you think we'll ever find out what really happened?" Kai asked, staring into the flames. "I don't know," Sarah replied. "But we can't give up. We have to keep looking for answers." The fire crackled softly as the group settled down for the night. Despite the uncertainty of their future, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. Kai lay back, staring at the flickering shadows on the ceiling. The factory's vast open space felt safer than their previous shelter, but the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on his chest. He glanced at his grandparents, their faces softened in the dim light, and felt a surge of determination. "We'll get through this," he whispered to himself. "We have to." The group drifted off to sleep, the day's exhaustion finally taking its toll. Outside, the night continued, but for a moment they found peace in their new sanctuary. The fight for survival had only just begun, but for the first time they felt a spark of hope.